So if you're just getting into woodworking, there's really 5 classes of router bits that you should be looking at. Now the shank that you're shopping for depends on what type of router you're using. If you just have a little compact trim router, then just limit your search to 1/4 inch shank bits, and you won't be able to use the larger 1/2 inch shank until you step up to a full-size 2 or 2 1/4 horsepower router or more that will allow you to use that 1/2 inch collet. Roundover bits are the first thing you should shop for, and they have them in all sizes. I use an 1/8 inch roundover bit most commonly in my shop, but I also reach for a 1/4 inch roundover bit quite regularly as well. Now, over the years, I've developed a detailed collection, so I have them all the way up the size spectrum, and I can tell you, I don't use those large roundover bits very often. I like to get a couple of the roundover bits in different shank sizes. One I dedicate to my little compact trim router, and another one I'll have available for use in a larger handheld router. The second class of router bits you'll be shopping for are spiral bits. And you say, wait a second, I'm a beginner woodworker, I don't have the budget yet for large diameter, full carbide spiral bits. And the way you get around that is just shop for 1/4 inch spiral bits. They're actually really affordable, and they just cut like a dream. There's 2 main types of the spiral bits. One is a down cut and one is an up cut. And here's how to tell what kind of spiral bit you have. Just grab it on the shank side and rotate it clockwise. If the little glint or reflection off the carbide appears to be moving down towards the tip of the bit, you have a down cut bit. This one has a bearing on the tip, which actually only costs a few dollars more in these 1/4 inch spiral bits. So again, rotating the bit clockwise, you see that the glint or the sheen off the carbide looks like it's moving up towards the shank of the bit. That makes this an upcut spiral. Now a downcut spiral would be a good choice if you're trying to protect the surface of your workpiece, especially if you have veneers like a plywood product. And an upcut spiral would be a great choice for doing mortises, and that's just because the action of the bit helps evacuate the waste from the mortise. And then you have your bearing guided bits. There's 2 varieties within this class of router bits. If the bearing is at the tip, it's referred to as a flush trimming bit. If the bearing is down towards the shank, then it's a pattern routing bit. Now the key thing about these bits is that the bearing is the same diameter as the cutter. This allows you to flush trim a workpiece to a pattern, and that can be really useful if you want to make 2 or more of the same parts for your project. Consider cutter length so that you have a long enough bit for the work that you're doing, and think about bit diameter. The smaller the bit, likely the less expensive it'll be, but sometimes with the larger diameter bits, you get a smoother cutting action. Short length pattern routing bits are really useful for cutting dados, especially if you have a jig set up to handle a bearing guided bit. Typically I would buy these in 1/2 inch diameter and with a cutting length of 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch. Next up are the rabbiting bits, and it looks a lot like a short length straight bit, but it's bearing guided. And the key here is that the bearing is a much smaller diameter than the cutter. This sort of bit will be particularly helpful if your shop doesn't yet have a good dado blade that you can run on the table saw. That's another good way to create rabbets, but when you're getting going, you might just need that cheaper way to do it, and that's of course with a rabbiting bit. Sometimes a rabbiting bit will come in a kit with a single bit and a few bearings to go along with it. The bearings are interchangeable, and what that lets you do is create a rabbet of a different width. Last but not least are the plain old straight bits. Now these are carbide tip bits just like the rest of them, but they're not spiral and there's nothing too fancy about them. I like to get a good selection of straight bits, especially in the 1/2 inch or 3/4 inch size. Now they even have a specialty bit that's a 23/32 diameter, and that's particularly useful if you plan on doing dados for plywood if you're building any case pieces. But if you want to skip the specialty straight bits, you can do a lot with just a 1/2 inch straight bit. I'll put a link in the description box to a video that'll show you how to build a dado jig so you can use a 1/2 inch bit for most of your dados. Let's wrap things up with a couple bits that I think you can skip as a beginner woodworker. One is an OG bit. I have several of those in my collection, but honestly, I don't get much mileage from them. Another is a chamfer bit. Unless you have a specific application where you need that chamfered look, just wait until the project calls for it. Otherwise, focus on these 5 main categories to outfit your router bit collection. Remember to track down the links in the description box for any of the products we talked about today. I'll also have for you a link to a video on how to build your own dado jig. That's the one that uses a 1/2-inch straight bit to make common sized dados. It's a really fun project to do, and you'll use it all the time in the shop. All right guys, hit me with a thumbs up if you like the topic, and feel free to subscribe to the channel. We'll see you on the next one.